So hi, I'm Jackie, and I didn't realize this is a story until I first told it. I grew up in an urban environment, but I always was drawn to nature, which was a challenge. Mainly we had ants crawling on the ground, which I always observed, and sparrows. My father called them chippies. I would go up to the chain link fence where the bushes were behind and get real close so I could just observe the sparrows through the fence without any fence obscuring my vision. When I got to be older and got my own apartment, it was in the big city, in lots of tall buildings, and it didn't have any screens, which really wasn't a big thing because there wasn't any bugs around to come in. But one day I was on the phone with my mother, and in flew this winged flying thing, and I had no clue what it was. It was iridescent. It had gigantic wings. And I was freaking out, and my mother calmed me down, and I described it to her, and she said, "That's a dragonfly, not to worry." So I observed it, and it flew out. After that, I moved with my family, which was my daughter then and my husband, to Florida. And we really loved it there immediately, especially my fascination with little critters. Immediately we could see a lot of lizards all around. It was a wet environment. They would crawl on the path when you'd walk. One crawled over my tummy when I was sunbathing. Frogs I loved. They were croaking in the evening, just such a peaceful sound. But, toads were everywhere at certain parts of the year, even in my door handle, which I squished, which was a little unpleasant. But you learn to live with all those critters. Snakes would come in occasionally. Palmetto bugs, which are the big kind of roach bugs that look like roaches, but they live in palmetto trees. They were occasionally in the house. Lizards would come in. My kids would gently lift them out of the house without their tails breaking off, unlike the dog, who would get the lizard in its mouth, and then the tail would come off and be squiggling on the floor. So we were just at home. The palmetto bugs could be disturbing. Like one night when I was trying to sleep, and there was one rampaging through my papers on my desk, and I had to put it out gently, which we always were very accommodating, because we realized, this is kind of their environment as much as ours. Raccoons and opossum outside, both places where we lived. Birds of, Florida birds that were just amazing to watch, like ibis, flocks of them, herons, pelicans at the dock. There was a river otter came across the backyard one day, but I thought that was just a little unpleasant and slinky, and it wasn't my favorite. Even the bigger animals, like and we did call them critters because somehow I felt at home with them, and I never really needed to identify, this is a certain type of toad, or this is a certain type of frog, or insect even. It's just that umbrella term of critter. Even the bigger ones, like manatees that we swam with, and gators that you could see when you're kayaking. I didn't really have a fear. I realized, if you approach them, the gators even will just leave and leave you to be. Much like the lizards, would make themselves at home in my house, even when I was doing the laundry one day, which was a situation where I had to walk out the back door and walk into a closet or open a closet to get to the washing machine, there was a lizard. And it froze, and I felt like I was invading its space. So I spoke very softly to it, and it seemed to listen, and it calmed down and it walked away. Such great experiences that even though I had to share my space with them, I was happy to. But then one night I was driving on a really dark road, and it was the night after I left my daughter off at college, and I was feeling very strange. And a strange thing happened. I was going about 60 miles an hour on a newly expanded highway and hit something, and it was loud, and it seemed like it was a log, and I couldn't imagine why, because there was lots of roadway between me and the side of the road. And I stopped, I pulled over and opened the door, and there was smoldering car parts just sticking out from where I would be stepping. There was a headlamp and part of my radiator, and I got out, got beyond it, and another driver stopped, and we were just puzzled. I was hoping it wasn't a person, and I called the sheriff, I called my sister, very upset. And the sheriff came, and I went into his vehicle and waited for him, it seemed like forever, for him to come and tell me what had happened. He came back, and he was very nonchalant, said, you hit a gator, you went over it, but it's not dead, you didn't kill it. But you did take out one of its eyes. And he said, I pulled it off the road. So I was like, great, this seems the best scenario under the circumstances. He said it was a baby, it was about 4 feet. So I got my car into the shop, it was almost totaled. I got a rental, and the next day came across that same roadway and saw the gator, and it was on its back, and it was, in fact, food for other critters. Shortly after I heard that a driver was killed on that same spot because feral pigs had run in front of their car. And at that moment, pretty much, or at that time period, I realized that I want to leave Florida, and it was time to go. Not just because I was afraid of anything, but I felt like I wanted to pack up and leave that environment for the critters, because I think Florida is a environmental disaster, actually, and I've heard this said, and I believe it. And I think the best thing we can do is leave the state and let it go back to nature in a lot of ways. So thank you.